Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Ravalin with BASF and want to welcome you to the meeting. We're just going to talk about coffee and Kona and resistance to fungicides and how to really take care of your orchard the best. And of course, I represent Priaxor herbicide, so incorporate that into our discussion also. And basically, the goal is to help you use it so you get the best response from your trees. So thank you to Andrea and Matt and Reggie for having me, and just ask any questions you want. Okay, so I titled this kind of how to fight the best fight against CLR. And the reason, I go that direction is we know spraying's part of it. We know the use of appropriate chemicals that are active on CLR are part of it. But ultimately, what I want to remember, or what I want you to remember, is no matter how you're spraying, whether it's mechanical or with a backpack sprayer, the most important thing you can do with any of the products is get good coverage. So coverage is everything. We'll go through a lot of terms. Sometimes I'll call them marketing terms, but at the end of the day, they're just that. They're marketing terms. My goal is really to help you. And the best thing I can say is, if you want to do a good job, you've got to get good coverage no matter how you're spraying. So here's a microscopic picture of a fungal spore. And if you look at the picture on the left, what you'll see is a very healthy spore. Think of that as the CLR spore when it lands on your plant, on your leaf. And that spore is going to do two things, or try to do two things. And the first is it's going to try and put out a little root, just like a plant would root. It's got a fancy name. They call it a storia. And then the second thing is it's going to put out this little thing you see circled in red there, which is called the Priaxor. The names don't matter as much as what they do. And what that does is create a bunch of infection pegs. So one part of it's going into the plant trying to suck out nutrients. That's a problem. But the other part of it, what's in the red circle, is going to go out into the plant and just penetrate into the leaf. And if it does that successfully, then you're going to get a whole bunch of branches like that second picture from the left. And it's just going to reproduce. Once it's reproducing, you've got serious problems, and it does so very, very quickly. What we're trying to do with chemicals is to the far right. We're trying to shrivel up that spore, just suck all the life out of it, all the moisture. We're breaking down the cell wall of that fungal spore. At the end of the day, that second picture from the right, we're not going to get them all, right? There's still going to be a few remaining. But if you look at the difference between the two middle pictures, just remember we're fighting this disease constantly. It's not a one treatment and be done with it. That's why the program and the way you set up your program is really important, because fungicides, it sounds like they're killers, but really we're just slowing them down. We're just inhibiting their development. If you look at that same picture really up close, you'll see the spore, you'll see the infection pegs go out on untreated. This was treated with Priaxor specifically. And you'll see the healthy infection pegs. If you look at the picture on the right, the treated picture, you'll see, again, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to turn all this into just useless powder and dried up spores and things that don't have the energy to reproduce. That's how we stay ahead of the disease. So if you think about the fungicides that you use and you just go into why you're trying to use certain types, there's non-systemic, a lot of times we call those contact, and then there's systemic fungicides. So if you look at a non-systemic fungicide, the best way to think of it is like paint. You spraying is like painting a tabletop. And if you paint that tabletop well, when the disease spore lands on it, it can't do anything. It's going to take in the chemical. It's going to shrivel up and die. So they kill pretty much on contact. But you also have to think about it. If you don't paint the tabletop well, then there's spots for them to land. That's, again, where coverage is very important. They work at a lot of different areas on the fungus, so they just don't kill the fungus in one way, but maybe they kill it in 2 or 3 or 4 ways. And because of that, there's a very low risk of resistance. So when we talk about the contact products, it's very important that you use them in between the Priaxor. And the reason is because if you just use the Priaxor over and over, the fungus would become resistant to it. We'll talk about that in more depth, but you just got to know you're using these other products to make the Priaxor last longer, because really it's the only systemic product you have. And when we talk about systemic products, we talk about residual, because it's going into the plant. They do penetrate the plant tissue. So even in something as waxy and as hard of a leaf like coffee, what happens is they absorb into that tissue, they hold on to that tissue, they move through the tissue. And all those are great properties to have. However, they're so specific that they only kill at one spot. So we're only killing the fungus in one certain way. Because of that, we give the fungus the ability to change. So if we talk about resistance, whether it's genetic resistance, because you do have some genetic resistance in coffee varieties, the fungus works to overcome that. Its whole goal is to overcome the plant resistance, the genetic resistance. When you start attacking it with chemicals, its next goal is to overcome that chemical. So the more specific the chemical, the easier it is for the plant fungus to overcome the chemical. I use boxing analogies sometimes. So think of it, you're trying to hit me in the nose, right? And you're standing there and you're punching at my nose. I take a couple shots, and then all of a sudden I start to move my head to the side. That's really all the fungus is doing. It's moving its head to the left or the right, trying to stay out of the way of the material that you're spraying on. So if you only have one punch, just a jab at my nose, that's pretty easy to beat. When you start putting in 2 or 3 punches, now it's harder for me to move away. I don't really know which way to move, which is why Priaxor has 2 products in it, right? So if it moves a little to the left, we can still kill it. If it moves in a little to the right, we can still kill it. But still, we need to protect those products. Here's just a picture. Again, it's under a microscope. If you look at the left, that would be a contact. That would be your paint. You see, we're leaving the residue on the outside of the leaf. And that's important. And you can see why coverage would be important, because even that, so that little organ you see on the plant, that's the stomata. That's where the plant breathes. But if you look just below that, you'll see a little spot that doesn't have any residue. That would be a susceptible spot for the fungal spore to live on. You look at the right and you see the systemic fungicide, and there's a lot of different kinds of systemic fungicides, but really they absorb into the tissue. That's the main thing to remember. So your coverage in the tissue is better. When the spore lands on the outside of that, the tissue is holding the material evenly. That's important. Still, coverage is very, very important, because if you see the next little spot to it in the upper left-hand corner of the systemic fungicide picture, the first thing you should notice is there's room in between. That room in between is where the fungus can land. So in the consideration of your fungicide, and on all of them, coverage is important. You can see where I put the little coffee leaf at the top, and you can see the yellow thing representing the spray droplet and all the arrows moving out to the edge. If something is systemic, it can be systemic in 3 ways. Sometimes it's what they call translaminar. That is from the top of the leaf to the bottom. So if you think about, I put a dime on the top of your leaf, a dime-sized spray droplet, it absorbs through. By the time it comes out the bottom, usually that dime's about the size of a nickel, because osmosis makes it kind of flow outward. So that spot enlarges. There's also what you see shown by the little yellow arrows up top, and that is acropedal movement. That just means from wherever you put it on, it's going to go up and out to the edge of the leaf or up and out to the edge of the tissue. So, if I stick my arms up in the air and you spray me right mid chest, my feet will be untreated. My arms, my head, everything up top, it's going to move up and out, but my feet will be untreated. There are a couple chemicals that move down, not fungicides though, nothing that we have. What you have is Movento that you use in coffee sometimes for green scale. That would be one of the very few, because there's only two, that move down. So that's quite an advantage, but that is not an advantage we have with CLR. That just doesn't exist. So just think of coverage is important because everything behind the yellow dot in the top picture is untreated. It only moves up and out. So you've got to get your coverage all the way into the base of the branch, all the way down to the base of the leaf. If you kind of do a life cycle picture of what a fungus does once that spore lands, you'll see germination, penetration, growth, and sporulation. And here's what's important to remembering, that it's all about prevention. When you spray with copper, or you spray with oxidate, or you spray with any of the biologicals, that could be your Serenade, your double nickel, your ProBlad, if you happen to use that. When you spray, everything you're doing is trying to prevent germination. Then you move to Priaxor, which I said is two chemicals. One is what they call strobilurin. If you look at the numbers on the jugs, you'll see the number 11. The other one is a SDHI. If you look at the number on the jug, it'll say a 7. Both those chemicals together are working in different ways, but more importantly, they give you a little more protection. So you're not just stopping germination. With part of it, you can stop germination and penetration. And with the other part, you can stop all the way to the point where you start to get that internal growth. So when you see the dark blue with the mycelial growth, light blue underneath it, what's important to know is by the time you see that, it's already advanced. And that's kind of a bummer, because when you see it, that's when you see the yellow lesion. It's already in there. It's already working. So again, timing and prevention is everything in this disease. We talk about curative, and I'm just going to tell you curative is a falsehood. It just doesn't happen. And then we talk about eradicants, which are really surface eradicants, and the best one to think of is oxidate. And what you're really doing is burning off the top. So the fungus has already gone in, successfully grown, and started sporulated. It wants to reproduce. And you're just burning those spores off the top. It's important. It's an important thing to do, but you're not burning into the leaf. You're not stopping that mycelial growth. It's like giving a haircut. And if you look at, my hairline and say, oh, I give them a really high and tight haircut, that's pretty effective for a little bit, but even my hair grows back in 3 weeks. At the same time, if you give somebody with a big healthy head a haircut, you can't even hardly tell. So your timing should be, in my opinion, after you have spreading events. So spreading events can be your heavy rains, and you just need to set back the amount of spores that are in your orchard, or it can be when your labor goes through and does work. So after a big spreading event, it's good to use an eradicant, and they are important for resistance management. Priaxor, like I said, falls into both of those ranges. So it is a little more forgiving all the way up to that mycelial growth, and even the very beginning of that mycelial growth. That's why some people use the word curative, but it really doesn't play into what you're trying to do. So if we kind of look at MOA, which is mode of action, and we look at that and we say, how do we improve the use of all these mode of actions, because this is really how they work, how they kill. And if I look at the development stages, again, it's just a different form, and you say, here's the germination up top, that spore landed, and it's starting to try and grow. And then it penetrates in, and then it grows internally, and then it forms its spores, and those spores spread all over, and it just goes round and round and round. What's important is when you see the yellow spots, you have to know it's already growing on the inside. So again, everything you're doing is preventative. You have about 2 to 4 hours for spores to germinate. You have about 1 to 2 days that spores will penetrate. And then you have about 4 to 6 weeks till their symptoms really appear to the point where you'll notice them a lot. So just know that by the time you see the yellow spot, that fungus is way ahead of you. Yeah. And yeah, that's a bad leaf that I shown there, but it's way ahead of you. That's why you've got to stop it right the second it lands on the leaf or tries to penetrate in. And that all means timing everything before that spreading event happens. The word curative, there's just nothing that's going to go into your plant tissue and take out all that mycelial growth. So
the systemic part of it really is just going into the leaves itself.
Into
it's
the
not going into beyond plant health to help it fight it. It's really fighting it right there at the leaf.
Correct. There is some plant health opportunity. We'll talk about that in the kind of second part. It's in the pyraclostrobin. So one of those two ingredients, and it's on the back of that flyer, one of those two ingredients has a ton of proof for plant health. And actually for coffee, it works out well, because if you say, what's the biggest advantage? The biggest advantage is weight gain, and you're selling coffee by the pound. So we have work not in coffee, but in most other crops, whether that's something as simple as cabbage, where we improve it 20 to 25%. So one head weighs 20 to 25% more, all other things being equal, or almonds, where we show, 12 to 15%, or citrus, so it's very universally accepted by plants and by most researchers that, this product can be used for weight gain, and also in wine grapes maturation, so getting riper quicker. So it is working on that aspect, but in terms of the fungus itself, it's what you get into the leaf that will stop that penetration and the very beginning of that intercellular mycelium. So just the very top of that. But once it's in there, it's not happening. You'll slow it down, you'll slow the spread down, but you won't go back and kill anything that exists. There is one group of chemicals. It's the triazoles that go a little farther. There's none registered in coffee, and most of them are very, very ineffective on CLR. If you were in Latin America, there's one thing they put on the ground there. They'll never be registered here. It's too much of a problem for the water and the soil movement. It's kind of an environmental nightmare, but down there they care less. So if we look at rotational products, copper would be my number one go-to. Oils, you can smother anything. Hydrogen peroxides and peracetic acid, that would be oxidate. Remember, that's an eradicant. And besides what they call the BMO2s, there's also, which are your Seraphyll, your double nickel, there's also your Problata BMO1, not very effective, but it's registered. Sometimes you may need to use it. One of the points I want to make on mixing, and that's peracetic acid right there. That's the chemical formula. And what you notice is all those red O's, that's oxygen, because that type of product it's a very simple product. It's very effective because it's so simple. And then you look at hydrogen peroxide. Again, you see those two big O's, right? That's a lot of oxygen attacking the outside. Think of me just bombing the outside of your skin with whatever is going to irritate your skin and slowly eat it up. That is what that type of product is doing. So there's no resistance to it, right? You can't stop something. You can't stop the oxidation from the sun, the ozone from eating up your skin. However, that's a lot of free oxygen in your tank, and that makes your tank very reactive. So a lot of times I get asked about mixing with our product with Priaxor. The answer is yes, you can. Actually, the company that makes that did all the testing for us. So you can mix it, but I want you to remember these two things. One is timing is everything. The longer you sit and let that product react, the more it's going to eat on our product, because oxygen pretty much attacks anything, free oxygen. So timing is everything. They say it's stable for up to 6 hours. I would tell you no more than 2. And I would really tell you 1. So from the time you mix your tank, whether it's a big tank or a little backpack, to the time you get it applied onto the trees, I would prefer it's less than an hour. 2 hours at the very most, because it's just reacting. And the way, you got to put a few funny pictures in, otherwise everybody falls asleep. The way it attacks a fungus is the same way it would attack a chemical. It just goes out and grabs on and just pokes holes in the skin eventually, and then all the contents kind of break apart. So MODA actions can look very intense, because there's a lot of different modes of actions. But really, we can stop things from forming energy. We can attack their outside walls. We can stop certain physiological procedures from happening in a fungal cell. There's a lot of ways to kill something, but not in coffee. You only have a few products. The Priaxor is a respiration inhibitor. Remember I said those two numbers, 7 and 11? So that's the two types of ways that it is classified as stopping respiration. So really, we're stopping the fungus from breathing and producing energy. But both products are operating side by side in the same spot. So when I said we can, still kill it if it moves a little to the left, still kill it if it moves a little to the right, that's important, because if it takes a big move against both of those types of killing it, then it's going to be resistant. And if it becomes resistant, it's going to be resistant to all the other chemistries in that class, in both those classes actually, but especially the one that is the FRAC 11, the QOI. So we've got to do everything we can to protect this chemistry, because even if it was to go away, all its cousins and brothers and sisters would not work. The other thing you have is the biologicals. And if you look at the arrows, you'll see they're working on two sites, either in the cell membrane or the cell wall. They can be a good alternative, but there's certain ways to use them. So if we just look at ours, we're just looking at the 2 respiration inhibitors. And the way I describe it to people is I'm reaching in through your navel and I'm grabbing each of your lungs. Okay. And I'm squeezing on both sides. So it's attacking 2 spots, but both of them are trying to do the same thing. They're really trying to stop you from creating energy and breathing. There's the strobilurin, which is for us pyraclostrobin, and we call that part of Priaxor, Cabrio, Pristine, or Marilon. And then there's the other group, and again, that's called an SDHI, and that is also part of the Priaxor. So we put them together to be able to kill the fungus in 2 different ways. And the first way is that one compound, but you can see how close they're working. So inside the powerhouse, the generator for that cell, one of them is working at the 3rd site and the other one is working at the 2nd site. And what ultimately they're doing is stopping the cell from producing energy, which in fungus and people, anything that breathes really, is called ATP. So we're stopping 2 different reactions, but ultimately they're pretty close together. So again, we just need to be wary. The good news is the one that works on site 2 actually can grab 4 ways. So think about it again, like I'm reaching through your navel and I grab with the one chemical, I grab your lung, but I only grab your left lung in one little spot. With the other arm, I reach in and I grab your right lung, and I grab it in 4 different places. So resistance in the FRAC 11 group is much higher than resistance in the one that's grabbing 4 places, the FRAC 7 group. That's why we put those two chemicals together. So if a competitor was ever to come out with a FRAC 11 on the market, which happens to be what IR4 did a bunch of testing on, were other FRAC 11s, you'd only be grabbing the one lung in the one spot. It'd be so dangerous because, again, if that product stops working, everything related to it stops working. That's why, for me, for the coffee disease in your market, that this product's very important because it's binding that little blue square in 4 different places between 4 different proteins on the fungus. It makes it much more resilient of a chemical. You should get a much better lifespan out of that chemical. And because it's so hard to get something registered for coffee, that's really what we need. If you look at a bacillus, so now we're talking serenade and double nickel, you see they work in a completely different spot. They're on the cell wall and the cell membrane. That's why it's important to maybe work them into your rotation. If you do that, what you have to remember are a couple different things. They work by forming metabolites. And those metabolites, think of it as the thing with the yellow dot and the thing with the red dot, get in between all the normal structures of a cell wall and cell membrane, and they break it up, and then all the insides leak out. Pretty simple, really, right? I poke a hole in it, it leaks out. They work partially by going in and infecting the surface of your plant, and you see in the middle, now this says Seraphyll, which is ours, but we're not registered in Hawaii, but they still are all working the same way. They create a zone around it. So kind of like outpopulation. I come into the restaurant first, I ate all the food, you get there, there's nothing for you to eat, is really the best analogy. Then they also, because of that, put off products, because they're so successful, they put off products that outcompete and destroy the fungus. So around the colony that is the good disease, that would be the stuff you're spraying on, is a bunch of, I'll call them field ants that keep away the bad disease. So they're putting out those red and yellow dots, and that's breaking down and attacking the fungus. But ultimately, what you have to do is establish your colony. You have to establish colony first, because if the bad guy gets to the restaurant first, eats all the food, when you put the good guy there, there's nothing for him to eat. And the key thing, and I'll use just a person example. So if I have 2 kids, and those 2 kids have 10 kids, and those 10 kids have 100 kids, and we get maybe 20 generations long, and there's 1,000 of us in the room now, that all happens within a week. And then usually somewhere between day 7 and day 10, everybody dies. And even though I'm 20 generations older than everybody else, we all die on the same day. So you're, with those type of products, you're protected until you're not. And that is usually that 7 to 10 day range. In Hawaii, everything seems to happen faster. So I would lean more towards 7. And why that's important is to know when you're protected and when you're not protected. Because after 10 days, I'm going to tell you with that type of product, you're no longer protected. So again, you got to time this type of product to protect the spores from landing on your leaf, because in this type of product, they have to be there first. When you talk about resistance, and this would be to the Priaxor specifically, it could be to a bacillus, but generally there is not a resistance to it. Again, it kind of becomes population numbers. So you look at the first circle on the left, and you see there are 9 fungus, one of which is resistance. So 1 in 9 basically 12.5% of the population is resistant naturally. And that's the big point, that there are resistant fungus out there. See, there is resistant CLR out there naturally. It's biologically present. So we go kill the middle picture, all the ones that are susceptible, but we didn't get the best coverage in the world. We got pretty good. We still missed two. But now we jumped from about 12% of the population all the way up to 33% is resistant. And then when you get the reproduction, you have more resistant fungus. And that's why it's really important to get good coverage, because everything you do is really about population management. So few cartoon images here, but this is really a simple version of how resistance occurs. You get target site changes. It sounds fancy, but think of it like a lock and key, right? If you come with your key and put it in the lock, but I jammed a pencil in the lock already and broke it off, your key's not going to go in correctly. So then all of a sudden the fungus quits working, or the fungicide quits working. The fungus keeps on living. The other way is what they call overexpression. Think of it like I go to shake your hand. I have two hands, you have two hands. So I can tie up both your hands. But what if you start growing like 6 or 8 more arms out the back of your head? Now all of a sudden you got all these hands. Yeah, I know, a little wacky, but it makes sense. I can't tie up your hand, right? I can't tie it up. Now you're slapping me side of the head with all your extra arms. I was going to use Hercules and a Hydra, but I thought this guy looked pretty crazy, so I went with it. The next one is just pumps. Think of it like a water pump. The fungus pumps out the fungicide. It literally says this is bad. I'm going to pump it out. And the last one is I I call it. It makes its own tea or probiotic if you want, and then that probiotic, it beats up the fungicide. It chemically degrades it, or there's the old Pac-Man theory, right? It just has a vacuole inside the fungus cell that eats up the poison and just kind of encapsulates it, takes it out. If you've ever got a cyst on your hand, kind of the same thing. So the fungus has a lot of ways to break down product. And if you're only doing one thing, which each of the products in Priaxor does, it's easier, right? Because then it only has to do one thing to overcome it. So resistance is real. And the problem, you'll know when you see it, because the problem, especially with these two types of materials, is it's what I would call light switch resistance. It's qualitative or disruptive resistance. The product's either going to work or not. So if you break it, you won't know till the day you sprayed it and you go out there a week later and it'll look worse than ever. That's the unfortunate truth. There are other type of products that it's more of a gradual change, but that's not the chemistry we're dealing with in coffee in the Priaxor. It's more light switch resistance. So the lights are either on and it's working, or the lights are off and it's not. And if it chooses not to work, if the population starts to overcome it, it's going to be quite a while for it to come back and work again. It's not like, oh, I took a year off, it'll work again. It'll be more like 5+ years, most likely. And again, if you get more products, unfortunately, they'll probably be related, because this is the type of chemistry that works against this disease. So light switch resistance, we got to keep it on, because otherwise you're back to copper and oxidate and biologicals, which I don't think will do it for you. So when you're talking about management, right, because a lot of science and everything we talked about, this is more, what I'm doing. I'm the farmer now, and what do I do? When I rotate, which is incredibly important, everything I use has to be effective. And I have to get it out there probably at the highest rates and at the right timing. And again, the most important thing is coverage. Then when things really get bad, if I have a major spreading event like a heavy, heavy rain, or picking, pruning, any cultural operation where you've got people going through, knocking from plant to plant, it's probably a great time for an eradicant or a copper, which can act as an eradicant also. Normally, if you were in any other crop that I work in, I would tell you fully rotate, but you just don't have that many choices. You have really no choices. You have one. Uh, the most important thing in that case is never use the Priaxor and then come right back with it. It says you can do it at 30 days, but don't do it, right? Use it, go to something else, even two things if you can, and then come back. That would be how to use it. Now, this labeling is on the jugs of the newest production. So when we came out, it was a Section 18. You had to go through all kinds of things with the county. You had to have all the right paperwork, file your NOI. Then it turned into a supplemental, which just meant you had to carry the paper with you along with the jug. So you had both when you were spraying. It's printed on the jug now, but if you have older material, you still need to have a copy of the supplemental label with you, or at least the label off of a new jug. So it's all good to go, but you do need the correct labeling in hand with you when you applicate. It's got that 45-day pre-harvest interval. I know a lot of people worry about that, but that's because that one part, I called it a Frac 7, the SCHI type product, that one active ingredient lasts a long time. It breaks down incredibly slowly and it moves up and out through the leaf in the xylem. That's the water tissue. So since it breaks down so slowly, you can detect it out to 45 days. That doesn't mean it's killing the fungus for 45 days. I think 3 weeks is a good, fair estimate in your weather, which is much longer than anything else you have, right? Because I'll tell you, everything else is probably in that 7-day range. Some things are even in the 7-hour range, but it does last a long time in the tissue, and that's why we have that 45-day to harvest. So you're going to use it at 7.14 ounces, no matter what type of equipment you're using. You're going to use 20 gallons or more. Everything you can do to help coverage is very important. And you can't spray this by air. Uh, I don't know, looking at things right now, maybe we need to try and work on that. But with the water contamination possibilities of any product over here, I think that's going to be a pretty hard thing to overcome. Off the supplemental label, like I said, it'll show it expires in August 30th of this year, but the label's on the jug, so that supersedes it. Right? So it's important to have the right label with you. Make sure it is with you. We can use mechanical backpack sprayers. Okay, that is legal, but we cannot use what would be considered a mister. So never use a mister. If you ask me the difference, I'm going to say you got to talk to the manufacturer, but use a mechanical backpack sprayer. That'll work very, very well. We have a few do not mixes, right? You can't mix it with a solvent. So one of those products is so water soluble, goes into the leaf so quickly that if you push it in faster, you might actually hurt the leaf. So we don't mix it with solvents. We don't mix it with oils. Again, we can use 7.14 ounces, and ultimately, it says you can retreat 30 days later, but please don't unless you've put two other sprays in between. Yeah, and I like two. Yes, you could do one, but I like two better in between. It just kind of depends.
You should mix with a solvent. And if you want to convey surfactant.
Yeah, so the surfactants, my favorite will be a silicone, a light rate of a silicone. Um, Freeway is a really good one. Widespread can work. Either one is fine. What you don't want to do is mix it with a surfactant that is considered a penetrant or a sticker. So think about what I said. One product's going to kind of move in through osmosis and move through the leaf. The other product's going to go in because it's so soluble. If you stick it to the outside and I want it on the inside, you're not going to get the residual you need. So don't stick it to the outside. And then the other thing is don't try and help it in. if you were to mix it with oil, for example, or a penetrating surfactant, and all of a sudden you push it in too fast, you're going to leave a lesion. And even if you don't see that lesion, which you probably will in this case, if you don't see it, now all of a sudden your plant's got to put energy into repairing that lesion, and bacteria and other fungus are going to love you, right? They're going to say, oh, thank you for opening the door for me. And we just don't want that. So no penetrants, nothing oily. It's why you can't mix it with the Botanigard, because that's an EC. Um, so that's a big watch out, but no oils, nothing that's going to push it in faster. Now, you asked about health earlier, the plant health and the other effects. So this is a very simplified version of how pyraclostrobin, that's one of the active ingredients, works. And really, it turns on what they call nitrate reductase, which helps your plant take up more nitrogen. And that helps your plant increase biomass. And if you say how much, well, up to 25%, right? The bar, I mean, that did it on its own. That's pretty funny. The bar on the one side, shows increased biomass. That's not all plants, but we see 15 to 25% pretty regularly. And if you say, well, how long does this last in the plant? It's usually 2 to 3 weeks. It varies by species of plant, but it's usually 2 to 3 weeks. So greater nitrogen uptake, greater biomass, more green, healthy plant tissue leads to greater photosynthesis, leads to increased growth. It's really a pretty simple deal. And if you say, how much photosynthesis increase, well, you look here, and I know it says Maravon. That's the sister product to Priaxor. This just happened to be on a different crop. And you look and you say, well, up to a 50%, this thing's kind of on drugs now, up to a 50% increase or 25% increase in photosynthesis. That photosynthesis effect doesn't last as long as the nitrogen uptake, but it can go on 3 to 5 days. And there's a lot of different ways to measure it. It also helps reduce ethylene formation and oxidative stress. So if we talk about ethylene, it's more the senescence hormone, right? When things are dying, leaf drop because it's under stress. And ultimately, if you say, how does it reduce that? Well, it helps the plant to breathe better. So when the plant doesn't close its stomates, then the plant can do better. And so you start looking at it, what's the biggest time for stress? And it's really reproduction. And as you look at reproduction, so flower formation, your berry formation, you get all kinds of different weather. Well, right now you obviously have a lot of water and a lot of heat, but no matter what it is, if that's why it's such a great timing at flowering, that would be my first spray. And the reason is because then you'll get that maximum benefit from the plant stress. If you treat it that way, though, then you have to, wait to a while and until you come back with your second treatment. But no matter what the weather condition, reproducing is a lot of stress, and we can stop the disease and give it that plant health benefit. So really, how do you treat? Because that's the ultimate question. How do I work everything I said into just a couple slides? Go ahead. Okay.
Answer the question I was going to ask.
Oh, no problem. So I thought it through well then. That's a good sign. So I like to treat the new flush, the flowering, which is generally happens to coincide with your raining season. That's my first best treatment with Priaxor. Then you come in with your alternate chemistries, and then you can look and say, retreat with Priaxor, depending on your year. If you're totally getting wiped out by rain and just the disease all around you is going crazy, I think it's a good idea to come in then, right after you've put a couple other things in the middle. But in a perfect world, you would save it. You'd have your rainy season, your first treatment, you'd go to some coppers, maybe a little oxidate, maybe a little biological, and then you'd come back 45 days to harvest and you'd give your plant the boost right before harvest. So also in a perfect world, it's not always feasible, depend on the size and how you're planted. You would treat the flushes differently. You wouldn't spray the whole ranch at one time. In a perfect world, you would treat methodically, whether you have an acre, 5 acres, or 500 acres. You will treat the blocks as they're developing. And that would be your Priaxor treatment. Then my favorite, honestly, is copper, as opposed to biofungicides. The reason is there's no resistance. There's two types of coppers out there. One is straight copper hydroxide. The other is copper hydroxide mixed with copper oxychloride. That's more my favorite because it gives you two breakdowns. One is a chemical breakdown. They're both killing the fungus the same way. It's copper poisoning, obviously, but one is immediate. That's the hydroxide, but the oxychloride has to break down slowly because it's more of a physical breakdown on that product. And so you get a more controlled release. So I like that way a little bit. And then you come back depending on your season with your Priaxor, and then you can use copper by the end. Again, you can put oxidate in whenever you see the problems that you need to do something just to knock the sporulation down. And that's really it. So it's really how you break it all up.